では続いては NXP による WiFi6 に関する紹介です。NXP と聞くと i.MX などの ARM プロセッサーを思い浮かべますが、ネットワークデバイスも手掛けてるんですね。
はい、その通りです。今後成長すると思われるオートモーティブ、インダストリアル、IoT、モバイル、通信インフラといった市場で使用されているデバイスの技術革新に注力しているので、WiFi6 もその一つになるのですね。
ところで WiFi6 は既存の仕様と比べて何が違いますか？
はい。一言で言えば Wi-Fi5 からの世代交代です。Wi-Fi の歴史はこのスライドの通りで、Wi-Fi6 はこの最近リリースされ、このコンシュマー市場では、市民権を得た感じです。そしてそろそろ産業分野でも利用が増加するかなと雰囲気です。その理由の主なところは産業用 IoT が台頭してきたからです。
IoT との関係、Wi-Fi6 は IoT デバイスのための規格という意味でしょうか？
はい、そう言っても過言ではないと思います。従来は個々のデバイスのパフォーマンス向上にフォーカスしていましたが、IoT 時代はネットワークに接続するデバイスの数が増加している上、接続しているすべてのデバイスのパフォーマンス向上にフォーカスしています。
そうですか。では Wi-Fi の仕様など詳細についての説明をこれから皆さんと共有したいと思います。動画スタートです。
Hello, my name is Jay White, Senior Marketing Manager with NXP. And today we're going to talk about Wi-Fi6 and accelerating breakthroughs in different industries. But before we start talking about, breakthroughs and so forth, let's take a step back to talk about exactly what Wi-Fi6 is and how it can accelerate those next generation breakthroughs. Wi-Fi6 is a generational change for the Wi-Fi standard. When you take a look back at Wi-Fi throughout the years, previous generations of Wi-Fi really focused on individual device performance. So trying to take an individual device and getting the data from point A to point B as quickly as possible. And that was great. But as we look at what IoT has done for the industry and finding that there's more devices on the network, you start realizing that individual device performance has its limits. And so one of those big limitations is efficiency. When you have a lot of wireless devices on a network, trying to fight over spectrum, trying to fight over airtime, you find out that individual device performance runs into kind of some roadblocks. And so herein lies Wi-Fi6. Wi-Fi6 was introduced as high-efficiency Wi-Fi. And they've implemented some really key features to improve network efficiency, to reduce latency, to improve power consumption. And all this adds up to being able to create a wireless network that's more scalable, it's more efficient, and it improves the overall performance of all the devices on a network, not just the individual device performance. So Wi-Fi 6 has a couple key features. We'll go over those real quickly and talk about exactly how those correlate to different use cases. So one of the key, a couple of the key features and functions of Wi-Fi 6, first off is they've changed the modulation type by implementing OFDMA. So OFDMA really allows for improved efficiency of the available spectrum. So when you look at OFDMA versus previous OFDM modulation, you can expect up to about 60% more efficiency than previous modulation. So now you have essentially 60% better capacity on the network. And then you take that and marry that up to the available spectrum. So Wi-Fi 6 doesn't just work in 5 gigahertz, it works in 2.4 gigahertz and 5 gigahertz, and then also the upcoming 6 gigahertz band. So now you have more spectrum available with a more efficient modulation scheme. It allows for more devices on the network and more overall network capacity. They've done a couple other things as well, though. I mean, when you look at one of the big things that people typically try to focus on is battery power and consumption. So Wi-Fi 6 has a new feature called target wake time. It allows devices to remain asleep for longer periods of time, thus reducing overall system power consumption. Another thing where power consumption runs into is with the reduced latency that you realize with OFDMA and some of the other improvements. So when you're reducing latency, that means you have less time on air, and therefore also reducing how long the transmitter needs to be on. There's other things as well, though. I mean, when we look at how Wi-Fi 6 uses the available spectrum with BSS coloring, be able to do spectrum reuse. You look at things like 1024 QAM. So every packet that you send has it's a more dense packet structure. You look at things like multi-user MIMO, both upstream and downstream. And all this really just adds up to a really efficient network. But how does that correlate to different types of industry? How does that excel innovation? A couple different places you could see this in would be different areas around, for example, healthcare. Healthcare is a great example of where Wi-Fi 6 can shine. When we look at a typical hospital, there's more wireless devices in a hospital today than there were 10 years ago. And one of the big things in hospital is being able to push mobility. So mobility with a patient can improve the patient's outcomes, gives them a sense of freedom as they can move throughout a hospital. And having more wireless devices allows them to reduce the amount of cables and hookups to a patient. So Wi-Fi 6 is a great improvement to this area. So as more devices are on the wireless network, hospitals tend to be over congested. So things like BSS coloring and spatial reuse will be highly important for a medical environment. You look at reduced latency. So now you can reduce the airtime needed to send and receive packets, similar with multi-user MIMO upstream and downstream. And you can really start to realize some of those benefits. It's again going back to the individual device performance versus the network as a whole. When you're in a hospital, you don't just want one patient to be to get all the throughput, and so Wi-Fi 6 allows you to spread that efficiencies across the entire wireless network, so that all the devices on a network can realize a better quality of service. Yeah, another great area where we're seeing Wi-Fi 6 being used is specifically in Industry 4.0. With things like machine condition monitoring, and particularly AR and VR. We're finding that there's quite a few use cases around smart glasses and augmented reality. And smart glasses are interesting. They're increasing traction in industry really because of their ability to overlay digital twins for the assembly and maintenance workers, to provide on-screen instruction. And so this is really changing how we view typical day-to-day things. But smart glasses are interesting because they have a unique requirement around connectivity. They require robust connectivity, mainly because of their reliance on video, low latency connectivity, and really real-time data visualization. And so when you look at, again, previous generations of Wi-Fi weren't able to accomplish what you can do from a latency, spectrum, efficiency, and quality of service point of view. So Wi-Fi 6 is really ideal for areas with or use cases requiring smart glasses, AR and VR. I mean, of course, as you see, Wi-Fi is such a ubiquitous connectivity method throughout the industry. I mean, there's Wi-Fi in virtually every corner of every building. And so it really makes it prime for things, for example, machine condition monitoring. If you look at a factory. So previously, Wi-Fi consumed quite a bit of power. And again, it had some spectrum efficiency issues, but those have been addressed with Wi-Fi 6. And so now you can start to put Wi-Fi in sensors that previously didn't have Wi-Fi. And by putting Wi-Fi in sensors, now it means that you have more mobility, you have more flexibility in where you put these sensors, how you can manage updates, if you need to make any kind of changes to the layout of a factory, especially with things like co-packing, where you have machines that are being taken down and put up very quickly. Having wireless connectivity in these different machines can really help with the mobility and the setup and teardown times. So if there's anything to take away from today's presentation, it's really that Wi-Fi 6 isn't just an iterative change for Wi-Fi. It really is a generational change. It's changing the way that we use Wi-Fi. It's changing the use cases that Wi-Fi can be used in. It's really adding those enhancements and those benefits that can drive innovation. And there's plenty of new use cases out there. We just have to go out and find them.
先ほどの 5G 同様、いろいろと難しい話も出てきますね。
そうですよね。ちょっと先日の資料にいいものがありましたので、これで Wi-Fi6 の概要についてプチ補足説明します。Wi-Fi6 は一つ前の世代の Wi-Fi 規格と比べると、スループット、いわゆる速度が4倍に向上、かつ IoT デバイスにとってとても重要な低消費電力であり、バッテリー駆動型の IoT デバイスの実現が可能となっています。まさに IoT デバイスを増やしたいと思っている私たちには欠かせない新しいテクノロジーと言えますよね。
セミナーのプログラムがたくさんあるといいですね。いくつかの活用事例の紹介もありましたね。
はい。一つ目が病院ですね。現在は10年前に比べワイヤレスデバイスが増え、増加に伴う課題もできてきています。それら課題は Wi-Fi6 が解決してくれるとのこと。二つ目が工場。インダストリアル 4.0 の台頭により、AR、バーチャル、スマートグラスといった新しいユーザーインターフェースなど Wi-Fi6 を必要としているデバイスは日々増加傾向のようです。
そうですね。そのようなデバイスでは Wi-Fi6 の高速、低遅延、多数接続はとても魅力的な仕様ですね。
はい。動画の最後では NXP などで Wi-Fi 製品だけでなく ARM プロセッサー搭載の商品を写真載せていましたね。さすが NXP。